Yo, what's up guys? Boogle here. Today we got the Manic Lion updated guide. Lots of lion, deadly. Let's hop into the lineup explanation. Of course, as always with these updated guides, we're going to dive into the unit roles. Now this is one of these stages where meat shielding is actually a very important part. So as always, let's first dive into the meat shields. Like I mentioned earlier, this is one of these stages where meat shields is actually very important. And there are many stages where meat shields is actually very underlooked, as proper meat shielding can be the difference to winning or losing a stage. In this case, Manic Lion, the enemy version, is actually single target, so stocking up with the meat shields here is ideal. Doesn't necessarily have to be high level meat shields. Level 30 is what I recommend, but you'll have to understand the concept of fewer gaps in your meat shielding means much better stalling, which means the Manic Lions will have a much more difficult time pushing forward. So yes, an easy way to tackle that is bring more meat shields. Cheaper ones is recommended here, of course. But yeah, main things, 5 meat shields, more meat shields is better, especially for a stage like this. Now let's hop into the attackers of the lineup. This is the stage where the minimum of level 30 attackers or units if you're not using powerful options. But the idea here is pretty simple. Try to stack up as much DPS as possible and aim for AoE attackers. Units such as Cameraman is ultimate for this stage because of the stackability, the efficient cost, all packaged with the great general AoE damage. But there's also things like Cyborg, Crazed UFO, Drama Cats, Chill Cat can even work here, Pizza Cat. There are many attackers you can use here, not even counting the Ubers or a Bahamut as your main attacker here. So if you have any powerful Ubers, of course, slot them in. Use those Epic Fest Ubers that will completely demolish the stage. The purpose of me describing and explaining unit roles is for you to understand that you can replace units. You don't have to use the exact same lineup as long as those units that are being replaced fulfill the same role. In this case, being stackable high DPS units and or nukers, since a unit like Bahamut isn't stackable but still has crazy high DPS and a very high damaging attack. That about does it for attackers. Let's move on into the other part of this lineup explanation, and that is the crowd control units. I want to make it very clear here that crowd control units in this stage is completely optional. You won't need crowd control units to beat the stage. It'll just give you a much easier time, especially if you're using the bare minimum of level 30 units and level 20 Crazed / Manic Cats like we are here. If you were to go about this stage without crowd control units, since there isn't really much options because you'll have to find a crowd control unit that is able to crowd control traitless, you'll have to pretty much brute force the stage with higher level attackers or just more powerful attackers. In this example, we are using Valkyrie, which is a crowd control unit with a very scarce chance to freeze, but it does work, and it's just the accessible option here. If you have something better, of course, use it. If you have an Uberfest Uber that could crowd control traitless enemies, use it. Or maybe you have a unit like Gladios, which can completely demolish the stage as well. Once again, in this example, we're using Healer, which has a 100% chance to freeze against all traits, except metal. Main point here is, if you have crowd control units that work in the stage, bring them, they will help. If you don't, you won't need them here. You'll just have to brute force the stage with higher leveled attackers or banking on proper enough meat shielding with the baseline of level 30 attackers, which can get pretty rough. It will take multiple tries, so do keep that in mind. But that pretty much wraps up the lineup explanation. Let's now hop into the strategy explanation, where we'll cover multiple example runs. The power-ups I recommend for this stage is Cat CPU paired with a Rich Cat. I don't really recommend using one or the other, because if you're using Cat CPU without Rich Cat, you might have an issue with the wallet, and sometimes your Cat CPU just completely stops doing everything and fully focuses on the wallet, which will get you murdered. But this level is completely possible without power-ups, because in the beginning here, what you want to do is essentially stall as long as possible without killing this lion too quickly, because you want to absolutely save some cash for when the wave arrives. Now, most people would think you do want to actually push aggressively, which you can if you do have way higher leveled units, but we're using bare minimum level 30 units here. Once this line dies, you want to immediately stop all meat shielding. The reason is you want to lure, and if you don't lure, all of the lions will actually stack up together and come to your base all at once. That's a bad thing because the enemy Manic Lion hits one unit at a time. It has single target. So the less of them that are stacked together, the easier it is to manage the stack of lions that comes towards your base. So in this case, it's much safer to lure and then start building up your stack because all the Manic Lions don't spawn out at once. You can see they kind of trickle in and slowly stack up. So if you were to stack them up early on in the level and that huge horde of stacked lions rush towards your base, you're going to have a much difficult time stacking up your attackers. Now, of course, this becomes less of a problem when you have higher leveled attackers, but I am making these guides in assumption and in explanation with level 30 units as the baseline. So play it out, try to play aggressive one time, just see how it goes. Like in the video of using my own guide to beat this stage, the older one, I tried out testing more of an aggressive strategy, and I figured out that my levels are just not quite high enough to pull off that kind of strategy. So I opted for the lure, which is the classic fundamental strategy here, because in that video that I mentioned, I did use even lower levels than this in this gameplay example. So yes, the lower your levels, the more you'll have to rely on luring, using crowd control units to support your attackers so you can have a much easier time in this stage. Now, it's not really as simple as just lure, send out your units and win. Of course, there's much more to it, and we'll dive into that a bit more in this second example run. So in this run, you can see we're not using any crowd control units. We're using the brute force strategy here. We're just using powerful attackers, zero crowd control, just brute force. It is the same. Essentially, the beginning, lure, try not to kill this Manic Lion as quick as possible, stall, build up your cash so you are prepared for when the Manic Lion onslaught arrives. Believe it or not, the beginning is the most important part here, once again. And the second most important part is, of course, when you lure and how you send out your attackers, which I will talk about much more in this example run. So here we are. We're playing much more aggressively here since we are trying to brute force the stage, but we're still not completely stalling all the lions early up in the stage, because look at this. How many lines are stacked up here? It makes it much more difficult to stall against them. But when they arrive close to your base, you kind of want to meet them in front of your base. Do not lure them all the way to the base because you don't give yourself any ground to build up your stack. They're just going to be hitting your base. Essentially, we want to first use our meat shields to cover the ground, hold that ground, let our attackers move up, and then start attacking. If we don't use our meat shields to cover the ground, Bahamut's just going to fly in, get hit multiple times, and die. If we don't use our crowd control units to then hold the ground, support, keep the lines frozen, slowed, knocked back just for a moment for Bahamut to then fly in and do its damage, then you'll get overrun. So make sure not to blindly send in your main attacker straight into the lines for food. You want to set up your attackers and or crowd control units properly with your meat shields when you lure. Initially set that ground up with your meat shields, then maybe your crowd control units as the second priority, and then finally your attackers. And of course, this happens in much quick succession, so it can be a bit tricky to pull off, but eventually you'll figure it out. Once again, if you're still trying to find the balance between luring and attacking, I would recommend to try out the stage much more aggressively first, and then pace your way down to a more doable level. Try to find that sweet spot between balancing your attackers with your meat shields and or luring. If you are using the help of crowd control units or even a slow beam or a thunderbolt cannon, you can use that to your advantage to then give your Bahamut an easier window into the fight rather than just sending him out to die. The perfect example of this is in the video using my own guide to beat Manic Lion. So if you want to see that for yourself, you can go there and watch it, as we don't recycle our runs here. But that essentially wraps up the major strategies to Manic Lion. Initially, it could be a tricky stage, but once you're able to figure out that correct balance, it becomes much easier, especially when you learn the fact that Manic Lion is single target and your meat shields are essentially your best friend in this stage. But yeah, that pretty much wrapped this up. Drop a like if this guide helped you out, subscribe if you're new, join the hashtag Boogle gang, Discord down below. All the videos I talked about in this video are also down below. It's been John Boogle, and see ya.